Welcome back to the channel, Adventures Through Climate Change. I am your host, Trevor Snyder, and I appreciate you for joining me. We're just trying to take an armchair approach to what's going on with climate change, get everybody's opinions and the science behind it, and just try to figure out what's going on. Should we really be spending millions of dollars? What should we should we be worried about the population? What is going on? What is going on? It just we're answering a lot of questions. I think if you've seen my videos, you know where my premise is. Today we are looking at, we're part 2, part 3, talks 10B Ice Age Modulation, part 2, part 1 of part 2. Yeah, so we're back to part 1. That's what it is. Okay, if you guys haven't seen it, we watched Mr. Ralph Ellis in another episode, right? Just not too long ago, and it was just part 1, and we broke it down in 2 videos because obviously I like to talk a lot, and I apologize, but I appreciate you guys tuning in. I try to diagnose it a little bit in layman's terms because that's, and also because it helps me understand it talking through it out loud, and I hope it helps you guys understand it too. And then you can also put in the comments what an idiot I am and how I didn't get it. So with this, it's Ralph Ellis. Go ahead, and I'm already subscribed, but go ahead and take a subscription on that if you don't mind. Let's get into it. Basically, he breaks it down to, the Milankovitch. So in part 1 of his videos, the Milankovitch cycle was a huge contributing factor, and there's 3 things involved in that, and you can go take a look at that Milankovitch cycle video if you want that too. Otherwise, he talks about a little bit in part 1 also. But there's also other factors involved in that. The albedo of how much reflection or refraction of light from the snow caps is a big thing, and then CO2. And also when it gets really, really dry, and this was a big one for him, when it gets really, really dry and arid and whatnot, it creates a lot more dust, like the picture that's on his video right now. And what happens when that gets picked up is in the wind, that's naturally going to get picked up in the wind, right? Well, if you have more snow and more frost and whatnot from an ice age, that's going to land on it, right? And create dirty snow. That's going to actually increase insulation and decrease albedo. All things that he mentioned. So go check out that other video. I don't want to explain too much. Part 2. And once again, I have not seen this yet, so I don't know. I do appreciate you, Ralph Ellis. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. I hope you can't hear my kids yelling in the background. There he is.
Welcome back to the Illumination Talks.
Thanks.
This is part 2 of my talk on the mechanisms that control ice ages.
Okay.
And it's taken from my peer review,
which we read,
which is entitled The Modulation of Ice Ages via Precession
Most of it.
and Dust Albedo Feedback.
A third of it.
And this has been quite an influential paper, I suppose, because it's been downloaded some 20,000 times, which is quite high for any peer review science paper.
Very modest.
But I don't imagine you've seen it in the media very often, because it is somewhat heretical. We left part 1 with ice ages being controlled by albedo and dust, reflectivity.
I should have let him recap.
Of the ice sheets, and then dust getting on the ice sheets to reduce their reflectivity. And here is an image of this sort of reflectivity decrease you can get. This is dust on a modern ice sheet, and you can see how dark they can become if you get, this is industrial dust from...
I was going to say, most of the dust up there now, or most of the ice is covered in black, and people were having a heyday over this because a lot of the ships don't have the proper filters, and they're blowing stacks and diesel fuel, and it's getting all over the ice, and it's just blanketing it, and so it looks dark and hideous. And that's actually, I think, what he's talking about. That's what that is.
Mostly from China, getting onto the ice sheets. And this is not 1 year's worth of dust. This is dust concentration on the surface, because the ice can melt and ablate and leave the dust on the surface for the next year. And that's why we get ice of this color.
Some might
And
run
that
off.
makes a big difference to the absorption of insolation or sunlight during the next summer.
Makes sense.
So how do we know that dust in the ice ages is causing warming and not simply consequential? The first clue, I suppose, is that during the ice ages, dust precedes each temperature rise. So in this graph here, we can see temperature on the top in red and dust on the bottom in green. And we can see here that the green plot precedes the red rises. So we get a rise in green dust, and then that is followed by a rise in the red temperature. So dust is preceding temperature, and so it looks like that dust could be controlling temperature. Another way of showing that
Or a correlation, at least.
dust is causal to temperature rises is to prove that the dust is intimately linked to the ice age cycle. So what causes dust? Why, after, say, 80,000 years or 100,000 years during the ice age cycle, do we suddenly get a lot of dust? And very, very high peaks of dust at that. So where did this dust come from? And what type of dust is it? I mean, is it volcanic? Where did it come from? Well, the isotopic analysis of dust in the Greenland ice sheet that still remains shows that it came from the Gobi Desert. Well, currently, most of the Gobi is not a desert. Most of it is actually steppe grassland. But we know that it was a desert during the ice ages because of the deposits on the lowest plateau in central northern China, where there are layers and layers and layers, tens of meters, hundreds of meters thick, of the dust that's come off the Gobi Plateau. And it's built up a load of strata over that region from the last million or more years, showing that the dust increases during the ice age maximum when it is coldest. But why does the Gobi produce dust during the ice age maximum?
That was my question, because in my head I'm thinking, all right, well, I can understand a desert creating dust, but why is it green now? In an ice age, wouldn't it be a warmer portion that might even be like more of like a rainforest portion? I don't know. That was my initial thought based on how that would work, but I guess I'm completely wrong. Why don't you hit me with it, Mr. Ellis?
Why does it become a desert at that point? Well, scientists will say that these new deserts formed across the Gobi are caused by cooling and aridity, a lack of precipitation. But sometimes I think that these scientists have a bit of a one-track mind. They can't see anything out of their global warming box, because the PMIP-3 maps demonstrate very little change during the ice age maximum. PMIP is the Paleoclimatic Modelling Intercomparison Project, PMIP. And they've produced various maps for the during the ice ages, and this is the map of temperature during the ice age maximum, which was about 30,000 years ago. And as you can see, it was much, much cooler in the north, in North America. Oof. And in Siberia. It was much, much cooler.
Even
up to 20 degrees cooler at its maximum.
There's no warmth.
But the rest of the world, across the tropics and the temperate regions, that sort of light green across the center of this map was not actually that much colder. That light green is only 2 degrees centigrade cooler
2 degrees less
than modern temperatures.
I was thinking that was the
clearly,
temperature.
That's not enough of a temperature change to make a desert out of the Gobi.
No.
So what about precipitation? Well, this is the PMIP precipitation map, and the white areas are no change in precipitation. And you can see the white areas cover most of North Africa up into Asia And the yellow areas there are very little change in precipitation all across the sort of Gobi region. And indeed, the Chinese scientists have done a lot of research on rainwater basins within the Gobi, and they have demonstrated that in many places there was more precipitation during the Ice Age maximum than there is now. So it seems clear from this that the desertification of the Gobi region was not caused by cooling or a lack of precipitation. So the impression we're given...
It's like I want to make a guess, and I don't even have a guess. Like, I don't even know. I guess we listen at this point.
...given is incorrect. But if scientists are wrong, then what else can cause a desert? Why does the Gobi region go from a steppe grassland, where there is ample grazing today, into a fully fledged shifting sand desert? So what else will cause a desert? Well, apart from cooling or precipitation.
Lack of water?
Well, the other things that might kill off plant life are nutrients, lack of nitrogen, lack of sunlight for some reason, or a lack of CO2. And we'll go through the reasons why CO2 will affect plant life in a minute. So which of these will change during an ice age? Well, we've already seen one. We've seen that temperatures will change. Mm-hmm. And on this graph, you can see that CO2 changes as well. So this is a plot of temperature versus CO2. So the temperature is in red and CO2 is in the blue. And you can see they are in step with each other. They correlate very nicely. So both temperature and CO2 change during the Ice Age.
We looked at that in video
They
one.
both fall during the Ice Age maximum when it is coldest. So which is responsible? Well, the temperature changes. We've seen that the temperature didn't change very much within the Gobi region because these temperature changes are regional. The very strong temperature change showed here is for the northern hemisphere up in the Arctic Circle, where the temperatures do change a great deal. Meanwhile, the blue plot is of CO2, and CO2 is measured globally. It's a global gas, and so you can only measure it globally. And so the CO2 will have an equal effect in the Arctic as it does in the temperate and tropical regions. So it's more likely that it is CO2 causing desertification and not temperature.
How does it get out of the air?
So is it doing so? Well, the only way to find out is to plot them. So let's plot CO2 versus dust, and here we get the graph, and you can see that CO2 and dust are highly correlated. So this graph needs a little bit of explanation because the CO2 is in blue, and you can hardly see it because it's covered up with the green, and the green is dust. But the dust plot has been inverted, and I've inverted the green plot so it corresponds more with the blue plot, so you can see how they rise and fall together. But it's inverted. So just in explanation, you can see 3, 4 or 5 peaks to the left. You can see the top of the blue plot. Blue is CO2. And as it falls, it goes down quite considerably. The green plot is actually increasing because it...
If you guys didn't understand that, it's an inverse relationship. You got to look at the ice core CO2's on the one side, and the dust is on the other way. Dust is on the other side, and the CO2 is on that side. And so it's a kind of a box graph, and he flipped them so that you can see the correlation as one rises, the other one falls, and vice versa, right? That's what I'm seeing. And this is time in thousands.
It's inverted.
Thousands of years.
So as CO2 reduces, dust increases. And they are highly correlated. So dust is inversely proportional.
We read
to
that in his
CO2.
paper. It's coming back.
And also, it's not obvious on this particular graph, but the dust plot is logarithmic. So there is a great deal more dust increase to the amount of CO2 decrease. But we've put it onto a logarithmic plot so that they match each other. Otherwise, the green plot would disappear way off the bottom of the graph somewhere, because there is a lot more dust generated by a very small CO2 change. So, dust and CO2 are highly correlated.
Small CO2
But
change in a dust
is the
increase
CO2
quite a
causal
bit,
of a
huh?
dust increase, or simply consequential?
But as CO2
Well,
goes down, dust goes
The
up.
way to find out is to find
CO2
a
goes up, dust goes
mechanism.
down.
Why?
That's exactly, okay, sorry. He's talking right now, but I'm putting stuff together. Like they said, in the times of the dinosaur, the CO2 was up, the dust was down because the plant life was so plentiful and large, right? Okay. Let's go ahead.
Is CO2 causing dust
couple more
increases? And the answer is that CO2 is essential for plant life. CO2 is a plant food. It's one of the most important gases in our atmosphere. Without CO2, all plants die. And at the pre-industrial concentrations of CO2, which is about 240 parts per million, plant life can thrive. But when we get to less than 150 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, most plants will die. So 90% of plants will die, and therefore 90% of animals will die, because plants lie at the bottom of the food chain, and if you lose the bottom of the food chain, everything above it will also die. And this is shown very well in this image, where we have 4 plants grown in different CO2 concentrations. So to the right, we have a plant grown in 700 parts per million. That's nearly double the CO2 concentration we have now. And you can see it's a healthy, strong plant. To the left of that, it's 350 parts per million. That's almost like today's concentration of CO2. And you can see a slightly smaller plant. Certainly its root system is smaller. To the left of that is 270 parts per million. That's almost like the pre-industrial CO2 level. And again, the plant is much smaller. And to the left of that, we have 150 parts per million, which is the sort of like glacial maximum concentration of CO2. And we can see a very small stunted plant that's not growing well at all.
Yeah,
and you might say, well, this plant is growing. Yes, but it's been proven that stunted plants like this, grown in low CO2 conditions, cannot complete their life cycle. They can't reproduce.
Don't get to the seed.
So within one generation, this plant will be exterminated in a region
more
with
CO2.
low CO2. So CO2 is essential for life. Without CO2, plants die. And as we've seen during the Ice Age, CO2 reduces, and it reduces to a point at which plants can die. And therefore we can end up with CO2 deserts, which is a lovely descriptive term which tells you exactly how these deserts form. And
I'm going to leave it there, and I mean this will be part 1 of his part 2, and I think that's a great spot to end right there, because a CO2 desert, that's how they describe them. The inverse relationship, the low CO2, it can't produce plant life. Nothing else. If plant life isn't going to be there, nothing else is going to be there, right? And it'll become a dust farm because of that. And then the wind will easily be able to pick up the dust. It'll distribute it all over the ice, etc. So that's what happens in that one. I'm going to let you go because I can't. I mean, I don't know if you can hear my kids. My kids are going crazy and I'm going nuts. So I'm a lot of work, and then when I'm home, the kids are usually home by the time I get home, right? So with that being said, hey, I'd love some comments, maybe some point me in the right direction for videos. Mr. Ellis pointed me in this direction. Leave a like and man, add a subscription, and thank you so much. Thank you so much. Adventures through climate change. We'll catch you on the next video.